Hi everyone, my name is Jody. You may know me from the Rehabilitation Counseling Program here at San Diego State University. For this presentation, my team and I will be discussing the emergency plan for IEP's policy within California. My team and I will address the following. We will describe the issue and identify what specific group is impacted the most. We will explain which agencies on policies address the issue or lack thereof. We will explain how the pandemic has affected service delivery. We will also describe stakeholders' perspectives. And we also want to know what the disability community is saying about the issue. We will discuss proposed solutions. And lastly, we will address how things would look differently if principles of disability justice were in the forefront. Thank you. Enjoy the presentation.
What is the policy? Let me describe the issue to you. In California, emergency situations occur often. Emergency situations can include natural disasters like wildfires, floods, and earthquakes, but can also include epidemics like the COVID-19 pandemic. Under California law, students with disabilities with an individualized education program, also known as an IEP, must have an emergency plan in place. The law requires IEP teams to consider how a student's individual needs may be impacted in emergency situations. This plan must address the student's special education, related services, supplementary aids and services, transition services, and extended school year services. Under state law, emergency situations include fires, floods, earthquakes, impassable roads, major safety hazards, epidemics, transportation strike by non-school provider, war, and other state of emergencies. The school should implement a child's emergency plan if the child has an emergency plan that the parent or guardian consented to, if the school district or you are impacted by one of the emergency situations listed previously, and in the event the child cannot receive instruction or services in person or at school for more than 10 school days. So what specific group is most impacted by this policy? If you guessed the students, you were right. Other groups who are impacted: the IEP team, parents and guardians, school district members, special education programs, and case managers and program specialists. Here's a video from an interview that better explains how specific groups are impacted as we get stakeholders' perspectives on the policy.
Hey ladies, hello. So good to talk to you guys. I want to start by having you guys introduce yourselves and explain why you're stakeholders to this policy. So I obviously both of you are teachers.
I am Marianne Spears. I'm a 6th grade general education teacher. I mostly teach reading and history this year.
I am Cassie Klopstock. I am a 6th grade teacher as well. I teach science and writing, general education.
Yes. And while we teach general education, we have about 85 students, and of those 85 students, 38 of them are on IEPs. So we work with that system a lot, and its policies.
Great, yeah. So I wanted to talk to you guys about get your perspective on Education Code 56345, which states that you have to include a description in an IEP of the way an IEP will be provided during an emergency. So this was created, as a response to COVID, and you guys mentioned you're general education teachers, but obviously a lot of your students are on IEPs, so you're familiar with kind of how this policy can impact your students. So if you guys wanted to maybe take turns talking about if you feel like this addition to the IEP benefits students with disabilities, or how do you think that impacts them?
I think that the services that are outlined in an IEP for a lot of our students are really crucial to their learning, and they wouldn't have an IEP if they didn't need those supports that were laid out. And so making sure that they have those services, even in times of crisis especially, I think are really, really important because they wouldn't be learning without them. So I think it's kind of the only way that they should legally get their education.
Yeah, this policy that came out of COVID allows the IEP is a legal contract, but it allows it to remain like, oh my gosh, it allows the students to continue to have access when access to supports that they need in learning when an emergency arises, right? Like we had to all switch on a virtual learning. A lot of people's lives were put on hold. We're looking at that learning loss or that learning gap we are now seeing. The students that we teach went through this period in about third grade, which is a big development in parts of their reading that we can now see up into where they are now. We see those gaps there. So having a legal policy that is putting that in place that they get those supports when they leave, or if they were to have another shutdown.
Yeah. And especially learning loss too with reading is huge, and getting those specialized instruction minutes is a huge part of a lot of our students' IEPs. And then things like speech pathology, the learning loss in times, especially of crisis or without being at school, can be really, really significant. So making sure that they are still getting those services is huge, and trying to combat that for not having as big a gap to make up when they're able to return to school in a normal setting.
Yeah. Would you say that this response or this policy was a response to, unfortunately, kids during COVID not getting their IEP accommodations?
I think definitely, because I think at almost no fault to the system itself, but it wasn't set up for something like that. And I think everyone was grossly underprepared. And a lot of people didn't know how to implement these services. And because they didn't know, they just slipped through the cracks, and they ended up not getting those services. So it was really hard for a lot of them.
Do you think that because of this policy and this change to the IEPs, that if we were to enter another pandemic or something, like I think it says in the list, like war is one of them, like things like that, do you think that this policy would benefit students with learning disabilities if another pandemic hit, and would have an impact on them receiving services?
Yeah, I think you would have to really think about what those services look like, because again, every IEP is individualized, right? So a lot of the accommodations are accommodations that are made within a classroom. So if you were to transfer that to an at-home setting or a virtual setting, you really have to be familiar with the student and what their specific accommodations are. If they need access to specific materials or specific devices, they need to, this policy will just make them legally obligated to those things, whether a teacher, administrator, somebody has to physically drive to their house and give them these resources.
Because in the IEP, it's like the plan is planning out how they would get their required resources. That's what this change was. So it's like you guys have to actually acknowledge, okay, for this student, this is how we would get them their IEP resources.
I am a little hesitant, and because this policy hasn't had to be acted on, thankfully, and hopefully we never have to see it acted on, but the level of infrastructure that it takes to implement all of these services, we only really see within the school. And even at that level, it's hard to have all of the resources and the supports to faithfully adhere to every single IEP. So I am nervous or am hesitant to think that just because they're legally obligated to do something, that would come to fruition. Of course, that's what the intent is, and that's what the hope is.
That's a lot
but
of
I
policy.
just have a lot of some reservation.
Good
in that,
idea, but okay, how are we gonna actually follow
would
through?
this actually happen?
No, definitely fair. I think that's kind of the thing with all policies is, okay, this is great and all, but let's see how it actually works when the time comes. But thank you guys. I appreciate your opinion.
Of course.
Miss Cassie and Miss Marianne, thank you guys very much. Let's go, 6th grade.
Hi everyone, my name is Merceda, and today I will be talking about which agencies or policies address the issue. We'll start off with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This one is a federal law that basically states that schools have to help students with disabilities learn, as well as require schools to develop and implement IEPs for these students. And then we have the US Department of Education. The Department of Education oversees the implementation of federal laws related to education, including the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the Department of Education provides guidance and resources to states and local education agencies on various aspects of special education, including emergency preparedness for students with disabilities. And third, we have Office of Special Education Programs, which administers and oversees programs and grants related to special education, including those established under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so, Office of Special Education Programs also provides guidance, technical assistance, and other resources to states and local education agencies to ensure compliance with Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as includes the development and implementation of IEPs that address emergency preparedness for students with disabilities. Fourth, we have state education agencies. So each state has its own state education agency that is responsible for overseeing education within their state. And so this one plays a crucial role in ensuring compliance with federal laws, such as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as providing support to local education agencies in implementing policies and practices related to special education, including the emergency planning for students with disabilities. And number five, we have local education agencies, which are responsible for implementing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and developing and implementing IEPs for eligible students with disabilities. Local education agencies are actually tasked with ensuring that emergency plans for students with disabilities are integrated into their overall emergency preparedness efforts and that appropriate supports and accommodations are being provided during these emergencies. And lastly, which you might have all heard of, is the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So basically, the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. So, schools must actually also ensure that emergency plans for students covered under Section 504 plans, which are similar to IEPs, but they differ in eligibility criteria, but basically to adequately address their needs during these emergencies. And so overall, these agencies and policies collaboratively um, provide a framework for addressing the issues related to emergency preparedness for students with disabilities who have IEPs, ensuring that they receive the necessary supports and accommodations to safely navigate any type of emergency situation.
Hi everyone, my name's Kiara and I'm going to be talking about how the pandemic affected service delivery for students with disabilities. With the pandemic, there were kind of two different transitions that went on. The first being the initial transition to remote learning. So when people got sent home, there were lockdowns, quarantines, and when parents really started having to try to homeschool their children. And then towards the end of the pandemic, there was a transition back to in-person learning, which raised some difficulties as well. So with these transitions, there's a lot of changes in social interactions, just time to be social in general. And some other issues were when students were going back to school, parents had concern about the medical safety, especially for their students with disabilities. Students with disabilities were disproportionately negatively affected by the pandemic, and research suggests that there's a larger decline in academic outcomes for students with disabilities when compared to their non disabled peers. And so we're going to get into some of the reasons that this is happening. So, one of the reasons this happened is because teachers and professionals were not trained nor prepared for distance learning. And so we can even think back to our own experiences in this program doing distance learning, classes over Zoom, having to navigate things like Canvas, and just not being in person with our peers and our professors. And so teachers and professionals weren't prepared for this even for general education students. So when you add on the extra supports needed for special education students, there's just a lot more barriers and challenges that are going to come up. There's also been an ongoing need for special education teachers and support staff. And so in a survey conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics, school principals reported which professionals they felt that they were lacking in order to properly manage special education services. And among the top positions reported were transportation staff, custodial staff, mental health professionals, tutors, and academic interventionists. And so if you feel like if you're lacking in these staff positions, it's going to be really hard to give the students the services and supports that they need when you're understaffed. And then you add on the added weight of the pandemic and doing things remote or virtually, and it kind of just all snowballs into a lot of challenges that don't give the student the best educational experience. Another aspect of why students with disabilities are disproportionately affected by the pandemic in terms of their education is also related to just the nature of the services and supports that they use, a lot of them being things that are done in person or hands-on. And so in a research study of 744 school districts conducted by the American Institutes for Research, respondents rated the difficulty of providing services and supports for students with disabilities during the early months of the pandemic. And respondents rated the following services and supports as more difficult or substantially more difficult: providing hands-on accommodations and services, providing appropriate instructional accommodations, providing speech therapy, engaging families for help with IEP requirements, and collaborating with social service or other agency partners. And so just from this list of like 5 or 6 services and supports, you can really see how it affects a lot of people. And it takes a lot of people to kind of make the educational process work and be effective. And so if all of these different aspects and professionals and services are being affected, then that student is not going to be able to have the best outcomes for their education. And so these are just some of the outcomes that have already been studied, but many of the outcomes of the pandemic are yet to be seen. I'm sure that, in the next 5 and 10 years, we're going to start seeing more trends of the effects of the pandemic and how it's had an impact on educational outcomes for students with disabilities.
Unlike many policies, this IEP policy actually seems to provide a solution to issues that may arise during a state of emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic. But like any good policy, it will only be useful if it is properly implemented. There are a few things IEP teams should do when creating an emergency plan to ensure their plan is thorough and effective. First, know, recognize, and address the students' accessibility challenges. This can be a range of things such as communication barriers, physical barriers, or which learning styles are most effective for the student. IEP teams should also practice emergency plans like fire drills so that everyone can practice what to do in case of an emergency. The IEP team should also educate the student on the different kinds of emergencies like fires, hurricanes, and earthquakes so that the student is aware of what is going on when an emergency happens. Lastly, multiple staff members at school should know a student's emergency plan. If only one staff member is aware of the plan and is absent, the student may not receive the proper supports they need to continue learning, whether in person or remote.
Vincent Valid, author of Skin, Tooth, and Bones, created the framework and practice of the 10 principles of disability justice to offer opportunities for movement building. The first principle is intersectionality, which highlights the different aspects that make a person. For example, someone is not just their disability, they're also identifiable by their experiences, their age, religion, and so forth. The second principle is leadership of those most impacted, so the people in the fight for change. Third is anti-capitalist politics, which addresses productivity and worth of a person. Fourth is cross-movement solidarity. This principle discusses how different movements need to come together to support each other's causes. The fifth is recognizing wholeness, so recognizing people's own experiences as it relates to them and what makes them them. Sixth is sustainability for the long term. Seventh is commitment to cross-disability solidarity, which addresses honoring and valuing others' insights. Eighth is interdependence, which means working to meet each other's needs. The ninth is collective access. This highlights individual needs, desires, and the capacity of the group. The 10th principle is collective liberation. This principle highlights the importance of people with different experiences and abilities moving together for a cause. How would things look different if the principles of disability justice were at the forefront? So this policy already addresses almost all of the principles of justice. It addresses intersectionality because the intersection of socioeconomic status and disability can influence access to accommodations. So a student who comes from a low-income background may have attended schools with fewer resources and therefore may have received educational testing much later in their educational career. For the second principle, leadership of those most impacted, Aurora Levins Morales said, "We are led by those who most know these systems." So that's the Department of Education and the policymakers who are implementing these policies in schools. It addresses the fourth principle, cross-movement solidarity, because disability justice aligns itself with education justice. And the fifth one, it recognizes wholeness. So this policy recognizes that children have a right to a free, appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE, even during an emergency situation.
Number 8, interdependence. We meet each other's needs as we build toward liberation. Number 9, collective access. Diverse people with disabilities bring flexibility and creative nuance that go beyond able-bodied/minded normativity to be in community with each other and get accessibility needs met. Number 10, collective liberation. No body or mind can be left behind. Only moving together can we accomplish the policy changes we need to benefit everyone, not just the majority.
Here's a list of our references. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for watching.